A very warm welcome to day 5 of International Leadership Week 2021 and to our final LinkedIn Live session of the week. I'm John Williams, Chief Executive of the Institute of Leadership and Management, and I'm delighted to be the host for today. This week, we've run more than 20 events with expert speakers from all around the globe discussing this year's theme of Leadership Reinvented. In this 30-minute LinkedIn Live session, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Amelie Villeneuve, Global Head of Learning at Standard Chartered Bank. Amelie is an experienced leader of organizational transformation at the global level and has over 20 years of experience in building and running a wide portfolio of complex change initiatives. Today, we're going to be discussing global citizenship, the need to reshape and reset the world and the way we work, and to look at what it takes to be a global leader. Amelie, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. What an honor to be able to have this conversation and also to be able to sit alongside the amazing speakers that you've had this week. I'm really looking forward to catching up on everything that I missed over the weekend. So thank you very much.
Our great pleasure. And I thought we might actually start today, but just by hearing your thoughts on how the last couple of years have shaped some of the behaviors of leaders worldwide.
So look, I mean, I think it's a great question, and I can only speak from my personal experience. For me, the last couple of years have been quite similar in many ways, although a little bit exaggerated um, in terms of how people have always reacted to disequilibrium, right? So I started my career on a trading floor in 1997, and what I saw then was exactly the same as what I see now, which is that there are basically two types of reactions to disequilibrium. There's one camp where, again, people and companies tend to behave quite similarly, where the temptation is quite rightly to focus first on mitigating risk. On protecting value for shareholders. Those are absolutely the right things to do. But that camp of people tends to also stop there, right? They tend to try to freeze and just wait for the disequilibrium to finish.
Mhm.
On the other hand, what I saw then 25 years ago, what I see today, actually even more exaggerated, is there is another group of companies and leaders who see disequilibrium as an opportunity to pursue opportunity, as an opportunity to reinvent, as an opportunity to aggressively actually invest in the future as at the same time as mitigating risk. And it's not very common to see that, but I mean, the company that I'm now at, Standard Chartered, was one of very few companies over the last couple of years that I've seen so aggressively pursue future skills, entrepreneurialism, innovation at a time when many other companies were kind of doubling down and really trying to slow things down. So I think the last couple of years have been anomalous in in many ways, but actually it tends to just present these reactions to this equilibrium that you can see for the last 20 years.
That's really, really interesting. First of all, in the context of this is not the first time that organizations and leaders have behaved in this way. And actually, that I guess with hindsight, we would see that as being not surprising. But also the fact, actually, because you mentioned organizations who either mitigate risk or seek opportunity, but actually, you did say they overlap. Those who seek opportunity will also mitigate risk at the same time.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, the reality is we live in a world where if you want to survive as a company, you have to operate in multiple speeds, right? You must obviously earn the right to have a future. That means
Mhm.
you have to be the best for today. You have to drive performance for today. You have to be simply better, faster, cheaper than your competitors, right? And if you don't do that, then you're just thinking wild thoughts and you sort of run off a cliff.
Mhm.
So the idea that you would not mitigate risk is just not realistic at all. But at the same time, companies also need to be investing time in thinking about how to extend their proposition, extend their markets, and sort of build a future for tomorrow. And I think this is the most often overlooked kind of speed, if you will. Companies and leaders need to also balance a view on how do we create net new value in the future, right? What does it really mean to create a global economy that we all want to lead in? domain, and what part do I play? And I think if you view those things as sequential or somehow insourced or outsourced, I don't see a very long-term future for you, right? I think the companies that do this well, the companies that survive and perform over time, are companies that are able to integrate those 3 points of view.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And that takes us very nicely on to actually thinking about the global economy, this idea of a global citizen. Can you tell us,
Yeah.
what is it that you understand by the term global citizen? Because I know that this is a significant part of your background.
Yeah, I mean, I've moved around a lot, and so I've had the pleasure to see what it is to do business and to live and to work and to play in many different countries, which is fantastic, and a great privilege. Um, but look, I mean, if you think about what is a global citizen, if I try to connect it to what I just said, investing in all three speeds
Mhm.
requires a reinvestment in purpose, right? You cannot operate at three speeds unless you really have a sense of why are we here? What are we trying
Yep.
to do? What makes us unique? And so I sort of look at global citizenship as the opportunity for businesses and leaders to take a greater stand, a purpose-driven stand in building the global economy that we want to lead at those different speeds, right? So specifically, I'll give you a few examples. There's
Yep.
an opportunity for us to reframe this next wave of globalization so that it's more inclusive and so that it creates more shared value across economies, right? That requires some deliberate action.
Mhm.
We know that if we invest in businesses that are women owned, that are more evenly spread around the world, that employ diverse and inclusive leaders, that overall the global economy will benefit and will benefit probably directionally in a way that we can all take advantage of, right? That we
Yep.
can all grow with. So
Mhm.
we know that if we can convene ecosystems and supply chains effectively, not only can we try to reverse the damage that we've done to the climate, for example, but also we can find new ways to create growth and new industries. And I
Mhm.
think that's really important. It's this convening power, and to me, that's at the heart of global citizenship. It's the ability to think economically, humanly, and in a purpose-driven way about what kind of global economy do we want to create. I hope that's not
Very
too high
interesting.
level.
No, it's
Yeah.
it's actually perfectly pitched because it does highlight the difference. If we think about this word citizen, the difference between individuals as global citizens and organizations as global citizens. And I guess how do you build a global citizen in the organizational sense?
Mhm. So I think you need a couple of things. The first thing, and I'm going to use a sort of informal phrase here, and I hope
Mm.
you don't mind. The first thing that is foundational is we need to build big ears. I learned this
Oh,
from one of my first bosses and a great mentor and somebody that I look up to a lot, Blair
mhm.
Shepherd, who's currently at PwC. And he used this concept of big ears, and it stuck with me for 25
Mhm.
years. Um, I think if you really want to understand and seize opportunity, you have to actually understand what it feels like to live, work, and play in various different places around the world.
Mhm.
And we're not very good yet as a global economy at actually talking to each other, right? So
Mhm.
governments are good at talking to governments, businesses can talk to businesses, NGOs can talk to NGOs, but I haven't really seen many performant opportunities for those stakeholder groups to come together and
Right.
seek opportunity. And I think the first step there is building these big ears so that we actually understand what it feels like to be in those different shoes. And that's something
Right.
you can do at a company. I think the second thing that you need to do at a broad brush level is to build better entrepreneurial skills
Mhm.
so that once you understand, it's not enough to understand. You actually have to seize opportunity, right? So you need this commercial
Right.
acumen, you need this innovation acumen, so that we can actually keep driving for performance,
Mhm.
all the while funding what tomorrow's business and thereafter will look like. And again, it seems to me that there are some real opportunities for businesses to take a much stronger part in
Mhm.
convening and resetting ecosystems, beyond policy making at their own level. How do I actually create new industries that really benefit the world, but benefit globalization in the ways I've just described? I don't know if that's
Very.
specific enough or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
that will.
it is, and actually, there's a logical linearity into the next question in a way, really, because what you've described there indicates that being a global citizen is not a state of grace; it's actually a behaviour. it is
Yes.
something that organizations, individuals actually have to do. Um, is that happening? I mean, beyond the relatively few large organizations that we know are acting in this way, is that cascading, do you think, through the business community and others?
Well, yes. I mean, I think I'm not a politician, and I
Hmm.
cannot comment on the efficacy or not of policies at the global level. So I
Yep,
won't even try. But what
yep.
I can say is that where you start to convene different parts of the ecosystem together to look at supply chains in their entirety, you
Hmm.
actually see a very different kind of conversation. Where you find pockets of innovation, if like me, you're interested in the circular economy, you
Yep.
would know that part of the problem to be solved is to fix the damage that today's industries are doing. Part of the problem to be solved is to innovate and find new industries that create new ways of working and new growth opportunities for how we want to live.
Mm.
And that innovation actually requires people to convene. I see a ton of new companies springing up, biomimicry companies, many companies that credibly play in the sustainable startup, and I think it's on businesses to help to grow those, to understand those, and to build those into their ecosystems, just as we equally support our clients in transitioning to a more sustainable way of working for themselves, right? So I think it's this
Mhm.
multi-level kind of series of actions, and I see a lot of progress in supporting the transition of clients to a more sustainable way of working, and I see a lot of progress in supporting innovation in the way that I've described.
Very interesting because this, just rolling on again from that, this indicates that there is an implicit, we'll call it an authority, a power, if you like, within organizations, whether they are public or private sector or political or whatever, which would enable them to do that ecosystem convening, to do that change in the shaping of the world. With authority, the cloak of authority, I've said this before, come the lead boots of responsibility. so,
Yeah.
so how do we ensure that those people at the head of global citizen organizations recognize not just their power and authority, but also their responsibility to actually reshape the world in a good way, if we can call it that?
Well, I mean, obviously, a lot of companies today are investing heavily in the kinds of collaborative and innovative practices associated with
Mm.
Agile,
Yep.
like the ability to bring diverse perspectives into the room, like the ability to quickly innovate and test with product owners and clients in the room,
Yep.
like the ability to develop MVPs and course correct. And I would
Mm.
say all of those principles are very much in line with what you would expect when you try to do something different and at this
Hmm.
scale. I mean, and it comes back to the very first point I made about global citizenship, right? If you're not purpose driven,
Hmm.
then you should not be doing this work because you're
Right.
doing it for some other ends, right? So I think it's about being purpose driven, having the right ways of working that enable you to course correct, to
Hmm.
have the right people in the room, and provide the levels of commercial acumen and innovation acumen and expertise
Hmm.
that mean that you can connect the right people. I mean, I think many global companies, including ourselves, are actually very privileged to have connections around the world that actually
Yep.
facilitate this kind of conversation. So I would
Yep.
say, if you're not connected to companies outside of your home country, if you're not really clear on what your purpose is, if you're not interested in innovation and you don't have a way of doing that, then those are some kind of foundational things that you would want to step into.
Mhm.
But then obviously have enough people in the room who can provide the guardrails of risk, provide the guardrails of purpose so that we're guided in the right direction.
Excellent, thank you. And I want to explore agile a bit more in a second, but just picking up on something that you'd said there about connections. And I
Yeah.
remember saying to people many years ago, one of the biggest differences between multinational corporations and SMEs is that very large corporations are connected everywhere, as you just
Yeah.
indicated, to each other, to competitors, governments, everybody, that sort of stuff. Whereas SMEs and actually even medium-sized businesses are relatively poorly connected in relation to their need to have connections. Is there a role, do you think, they're thinking about this global citizenship role for large organizations? Is there a role there for them in helping smaller or medium-sized organizations facilitate connections? I'm thinking about a bank in particular, which is connected all
Yes.
over the place, potentially usefully for
Yeah.
its clients.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I mean, this was the role that I saw companies play even when I was back at Google. They
Hmm.
started to do this kind of convening at the national economy level to look at what does it create to what does it take to create competitiveness at the local level. It's
Yep.
certainly something that that banks and we do anyway. And it is, as I was saying before, I think this is more and more what leaders are expected to do, right?
Hmm.
You have to be a convener of the
Yep.
ecosystem, because if you don't do it, then nobody does, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
I think moreover, as you look at all of the topics of leadership that you've been looking at,
Mhm.
they're all emergent and they're all social,
Yep.
right? So leadership is not an isolated kind of state of play, to use your
Hmm.
earlier expression. Leadership
Yep.
is an act, right? And it requires
Yep.
other people. And I think many companies, including at SCB, are quite good and even want to go further in terms of how do we bring different people across an economy together to
Hmm.
really understand what it takes to create shared economic value. I mean,
Excellent.
I'm very,
Yeah.
very lucky to work here. I do think that they do pay a lot of attention to that.
That's excellent, especially thinking about it from the perspective, as I said, of a bank, which is usefully connected for all of its stakeholders. Just thinking there about, and moving back to look at the Agile agenda, you mentioned there the idea of if organizations are not conveners, actually it's not going to happen. And I know that one of the
Yeah,
principles of agile working is around self-organizing teams. And I've often said actually self-organizing teams don't, because they do need they do need something. And this comes back to this idea of purpose. You said
yeah,
earlier on that actually purpose is the driving force behind agility.
yeah.
um, I think it might have been Napoleon that said, "First act, then see what happens." I know that
Yes.
is, yeah, that's one of the ways that you see agile iteration and things like that.
Yeah.
Is that the way that you see people needing to respond to the world in which we operate now?
Well, look, I can't say that Napoleon is a particular kind of person that I hold in my mind when I think about what to do, although I am related to someone who fought alongside Napoleon, for whatever that's worth.
Oh, right.
But but what's interesting, and this comes back to our first point of conversation, is
Mhm,
look, there are leaders that are very comfortable analyzing all of the data and
mhm.
then finding the only right answer. There are leaders that are
Right.
comfortable analyzing most of the data, coming
Mhm.
up with options and seeing what happens. And there are leaders that
Yeah.
are comfortable acting in a safe way, but then
Mhm.
making sense of the data and developing theory and a next plan after that. I
Yeah.
happen to be in that latter camp, right? I
Uh-huh.
am more comfortable leading in complexity and chaos than I am in complicated. But the reality is, every one of us has to be good at all of those. And the
Right.
problem is not just being good at those things; it's actually recognizing what problem you're trying to solve for at what time. Because
Right.
I come across all of those problems, you know, every day, as do we
Mhm,
all. And I think if you're uncomfortable with chaos, if you're
mhm.
uncomfortable with complexity, you tend to over rotate towards solving for the complicated, and you
Right.
kind of ignore, and the opportunity misses you to solve for some of those bigger issues. So
Mhm.
I mean, Napoleon, actually on this occasion, I probably agree with him. I think it's about not reckless action, but, taking bold, considered action, but
Mhm.
then really making the time to understand what happened, right? Make sense of the
Mhm.
data. Don't just keep acting, right?
Yep.
Otherwise, you look schizophrenic. Just
Yep.
act, make sense of what happened, have the right people in the room. And that's
Mhm.
back to our convening point.
Yep.
And then from there, if you share a common vision and a common purpose, then the scope of what you do and the cadence and who's
Mhm.
involved and what it costs, those things can all be fixed along the way, right? That's the core
Mhm.
principle of agile, but you must share a common vision.
Right, very interesting, and actually, we've had a question emailed in, which is I think is relevant to this. You mentioned the idea of data, of course, being not
Yeah,
dependent upon, but usefully using data in many ways. Earlier on, I mentioned, in fact, the very first question was around the last couple of years. How have they affected the way that leaders are behaving and stuff like this? And the question says, is there a risk in referring to the last 2 years as being anomalous? Because the last 2 years have just been a prover for continued stress as the pandemic
yeah.
continues and climate crises gather pace. So actually, the last 2 years might be wrongly described by me as something special. Maybe this refers back to your point about leaders actually having been like this 25 years ago just as much as they are now. Do you think there's a risk in calling the last 2 years very different?
I mean, we've had a global tragedy at a scale that we haven't seen for some decades, right?
Mm, mm,
And it's permanently reset how we live, work, and play.
yeah.
Um, I look. I mean, if you go to there are economic arguments for this, right? There are a number of economists who would say, um, basically, we live in a world of steady growth with inflection points, and what you have
Mm,
to do at an inflection point is just wait for it to inflect, and then you
yeah.
jump to the next S curve,
Yeah.
and you kind of reset. I kind of tend to view the world quite differently. I
Hmm.
think more and more uh, that we are in a world of permanent disequilibrium, right?
Right.
And so if
Right.
we're waiting for things to kind of go back to normal, we're
Yeah.
probably kidding ourselves. Um, that means that it's even more important that we very sensibly think about what data we need, and we very
Hmm.
robustly go back to that data set and really interrogate it, and interrogate that we've drawn the boundaries around the data set
Yep.
appropriately
Yep.
before we take decisions, right? I mean, if you look at a number of us, I think we're looking for clues. Very well respected authors were looking for clues about what to do, for example, in the global financial crisis, by looking at the recovery from the Great Depression.
Yep.
And I mean, there are important similarities, but
Yep.
there are
Mhm.
also important differences. So I mean, I think that anomalous is more a perspective,
Mm.
but data is really important. I think what's really important now is that with the wealth of data that's available, we all
Mhm.
have to be much more sophisticated in the data that we choose,
Yep.
and in resetting how often we look at that data, and what data we kind of draw boundaries around or not. Um,
Mhm.
I think that's really important. Otherwise, you just measure everything.
Right. Interesting. I have to say, one of the very many clever things that I've heard economists say was trends continue until they are reversed, which I always thought is it sounds like a tried truism, but actually it's really really important to remember that I think,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah, and particularly in this context of looking at data, what data, how much, and all of that, and this wonderful word VUCA, this rather unlovely acronym, actually, VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, that we've all become familiar with over the last few
Yes.
years. Uh, how, how do global citizens who have this responsibility for reshaping a world that is positive for us, how do those global citizens address the challenge of which data and how much in a world that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous? It's very challenging to do that.
Well, I mean, the first thing to do is not panic, right?
Mhm,
I think
mhm.
if you panic and you try to be resilient, and in your mind that really means be rigid,
Yep.
then you don't do anything. I think leaders that have been really successful, first of all, view this as an opportunity to see and seize new
Mhm.
opportunities, as
Yeah.
opposed to as something that you have to get out of as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
I think leaders that can create a vision that isn't totally, ignoring obviously the tragedies that happen in a time like this, but actually says we can do something that's better here. We can
Mhm.
actually take this chance to do something that really reverses. I think that that is a very successful attribute.
Mhm.
I mean, again, if you believe that we live in a world of permanent disequilibrium, then VUCA's here to stay. And
Yeah.
if VUCA's here to stay, either we can be depressed about it, or we can say,
Mhm.
actually, this is a wonderful chance for us to see new things. You only have to look at, I mean, Peter Diamandis is so brilliant at this, as is a lot of the Singularity University and many others. But
Mhm.
if you look at the theories around abundance and exponential thinking, you can see that depending on where you draw your data set from,
Mhm.
either this is the worst time in the world to be alive, or actually this is the best time in the world to be
Yep.
alive.
Uh-huh.
However, what we fear and hope has probably changed. I mean, I'm quite compelled by Harari's arguments around,
Mhm.
the shift in what humans fear and hope
Yep.
for has really changed, and therefore, again, to my point, have big ears.
Right.
Understand
Yep.
actually what people fear and hope for today, and if it's different, have the data sophistication to take meaningful insights from data at the right scope,
Yep.
and then have the ability, whether you call it entrepreneurialism, commercial minded, innovation, inspiration. I mean,
Mhm.
whatever resonates with you, but you as a leader then need to take those inputs and actually build something in response to those, and that requires convening, which
Mhm.
requires connections, and then it requires the ability to act. And I think, unfortunately, for many of us who've grown up in companies, big companies, for the last 25 years, we have been quite schooled to to act in a very kind of specific way that doesn't
Mhm.
take very many risks, and that really prioritizes the company over the customer,
Yep.
and
Yep.
kind of short-term growth over long-term global growth. And I think we just have to kind of reset all of those mindsets, basically.
Absolutely. And that brings us quite nicely back round to the point that you made earlier, right at the start, really, about the two camps into which most leaders fall: mitigating risk or actually seeking opportunity whilst mitigating risk. And also highlights the importance of agility as a and I
Yeah.
know it began 20 years ago this year, actually, as a methodology, or as a principle, then a methodology, then a mindset. Actually, it like leadership, it's a behavior. Like global citizenship, actually, it requires people to do things. Um,
Yeah.
how do we how do we, as global citizens, in inverted commas, encourage everybody to think at every level about their own agility and willingness to accept this continual change that's coming? How do we do that and help them do it with confidence?
Mhm. So, I mean, I love the use of the word confidence, because what I'm
Mhm.
most worried about, one of the things I'm most worried about, is that these global shifts that we've been talking about actually might disproportionately disadvantage the kind of diversity we want in the new talent pool,
Mhm.
and the kind of diversity that we want in the global economy, frankly.
Yep.
Um, so, if I take a very like specific learning orientation to this for a
Yes,
minute, as I
absolutely.
work in
Yep. Yep.
learning.
Yeah,
um,
indeed.
I think I think we must convene. There are many, many kind of wonderful programs that you can do, and that we do, as many others do, and that should continue. But
Mhm.
more and more, I see the importance of um, rapid kind of training every day. I mean, I'm
Mhm.
very much
Mhm.
taken by sports psychology,
Yep.
as a sort of part-time amateur athlete myself. Um,
Mhm.
we've developed, for example, a number of brain training games that
Mhm.
allow people to go in and literally flex a muscle that they would need to have maturity in for one of
Yep.
these new jobs for which there is a global shortage. For
Yep.
example, data analyst, right, or
Mhm.
cybersecurity. We've developed specific brain training games. So you go in 5 minutes a day, 5 days a week, and just
Right.
build the muscle.
Yep.
We've also made a lot of use of performance simulations,
Mhm.
which allow you to, again, accelerate your experience in a safe environment.
Yep.
And those things give a lot of confidence to various candidate pools who might not be confident enough to actually
Mhm.
take part. So, for example, I'll just use one that I know.
Yep.
I know that many women are not likely to apply for roles for which they
Mhm.
only fulfill less than 80% of the criteria.
Yep.
And so, where you can have brain training games, performance simulations, mentoring programs, which we have quite a
Mhm.
lot of, and an opportunity to go and job shadow, and career conversations, you
Yep.
actually amp up their confidence to even apply for roles in the first place. So I
Yep.
think building in these kind of more rapid experience-based learning is critical.
Yep.
We also have done a lot of work on learning in the flow of work,
Yes.
including
Yep.
looking at um, various integrated technologies that mean that you get access to just-in-time learning just when you need it in
Yep.
order to solve
Yep.
for a job, as
Yep.
well as a strong pool of coaches, agile and otherwise, so that you can
Mhm.
actually ask for help. So I think in terms of learning methods,
Yep.
I think a lot of work has been done, and I've been focusing on a lot of work with my amazing team at Standard Chartered
Mhm.
to build out some of those things. But I guess the one important like punchline that I wanted to end on is
Yep.
basically an invitation, right? None of this works if I keep it for myself, if I keep it
Yep.
for our company alone. And so that's why I'm really interested, and in fact the whole team is interested in leaders learning together, right? So I would
Mhm.
love to collaborate with companies, ideally non-competing, obviously, but even competing under careful circumstances. But I would love to collaborate with companies that are interested in thinking together about what the new global economy could look like,
Yep.
and actually finding a practical series of things to do that
Mhm.
we could all take part in. So I think all of the learning techniques are great, and we're definitely doing them. We've been building these future skills academies, as I said before,
Mhm.
for 2 years now,
Yep.
and that's been tremendously successful. But the next stage for me is about opening this up to
Mhm.
scale across the global economy as opposed to keeping it for ourselves.
Absolutely brilliant. Amelie, thank you very, very much indeed. A great discussion. And just to highlight just a couple of things that I pulled out of there, 4 or 5 things actually. One, this idea of the two camps of leaders, which overlap nevertheless in mitigating risks and seeking opportunity. Multiple speeds, 3 speeds required for organizations to operate at. The, clearly the core need for purpose as a driver for what we do. I love the big ears. Absolutely love that. I think that's great. I
Yes,
think many of our
me
audience
too.
will carry that with them for a long time now. That's absolutely
Yeah,
great. Yeah, that's it. And the need for entrepreneurial skills, but also underlying that, the need for us to help the world in a way develop the confidence to face a VUCA future and stuff like that.
yeah.
I think I thank you very much indeed for the call to action at the end as well. And we certainly are, you can imagine I will be in touch with you to talk about how we can
Oh,
work together
please.
as the
I
Institute
would really
and
love
you.
that.
Yeah, because I think certainly our audience, our members and our community will be very keen to engage in that. So I think we'll follow that up for sure afterwards. I think now it really, I have to say thank you, Amelie, for a great discussion. And just to say to everybody, make sure that you log on to our website, www.institutelm.com. From next week, you'll be able to catch up on any of the sessions that you've missed this week. And in fact, you'll be able to continue this discussion on the hub. All of our events are free to access. Continue the discussion on the hub, which is our community forum for leaders and managers at all levels. We hope that you really, really enjoyed this International Leadership Week and found insights, advice, and ideas that can work for your organizations across all levels of leadership. With that, I would just like to thank again our guest, Dr. Amelie Villeneuve, and to say thank you also to our sponsors for this year, Belbin and Heriot-Watt University's Edinburgh Business School. And I'd like to thank you, our audience, for being with us today and all week. And we look forward to connecting and engaging with you lots more in the future. Stay safe and stay inspired.